Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here with you, joined by TJ Mathewson, writer for BeaversEdge.com, and Ryan Harlan, writer from BeaversEdge.com. The whole gang is here. Happy to be talking with you guys and breaking down Oregon State's fall camp, which is just wrapped up this week. Recording this podcast on a Wednesday, and the Beavers wrapped up camp on Tuesday. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, talk about some position groups, the most important battles you guys want to hear about, and all that. But fellas, how we doing? Another camp in the books.
Yeah, that's camp number 4 for me. Man, so a lot's changed.
Camp
I've
number
been here
3.
a lot longer than I have, but four camps down. It is by the last week. It's a little long. I think most of us, like all the fans, are just waiting for the 31st. Just want to see a game out of the way, and I think there's a lot of things we want to see to sort of confirm to our eyes that we're seeing in all of camp when the games actually start to matter. So it's good to have it over, and it's good to be close to game week.
Yeah, I mean, for me, camp number 3. So not quite as long as TJ. TJ has a year at least on me for that. But hey, another camp in the books. Can't complain. Can't complain. Almost close to the season. We got football on Saturday. Week 0 starts up. College football. It's officially back, and then I know for Beaver fans are kind of eagerly waiting for the 31st for the Beavers to come out of the tunnel and take on Idaho State.
Yeah,
There
no,
aren't
and
actually good games this weekend, are there? Right?
Florida State plays Tech in Dublin. That's kind of an interesting game. Other than that, not so much. We talked about it a little bit on the radio this week, just because Tech is a little bit improved. Florida State, obviously, DJU, right? Some interesting, pieces. So I'm curious to see, for my own selfish reasons, I'm very curious to see how he leads the Seminoles this season. I'm very curious to see how they all play out this season. So we'll see. That's obviously college football, as Ryan mentioned, getting it back. But see, you guys make me feel old when I can add both of your years together. And it's still, because I believe this was number 11th season football team this year, but 10th fall camp. So it's they all seem to blur together after a certain amount of times, fellas. It's like, oh yeah, you kind of just know what to look for when you're like, I now know, like, from my lean years, you know what to look for when a team is not going to be very good. And you kind of know what to look for when a team's going to be pretty good. So it's definitely I've seen it all in camp. All the best, all the worst, and this camp was it brought its own excitement in some different ways, and we'll obviously get into the nitty gritty of what we liked and what we didn't like. But just on the surface for you guys, like what are your initial impressions because you guys obviously saw Jonathan Smith's fall camps in the past? What was just kind of your perspective on what was maybe different under Trent Bray as a whole? Like, for me, it really just seemed like the Beavers were more physical, maybe wanting to tackle a little bit more. That kind of stood out to me right away.
I don't know if there's any real pressing difference from what I noticed. It's just more of the new shape of the personnel of this roster, I would say. Because I think, Trent Bray's going to need more years under his belt to sort of get to where Jonathan was at with his roster last year. Where last year was like all this blue chip talent. If you like stack up the roster and you're like, oh man, like there's a dude at quarterback, couple at running back, 2 stud wide receivers, a starting Big Ten tight end this year. And then you go along the line, it's like, oh, NFL dude, future NFL dude, all conference. Like, this is pretty good. And then we walk into camp this year, and it's just not like that. Josh Gray's pretty much it in terms of productive returners on the offense and even along the defense as well. They just have so much to replace. So I think this camp was more of us being a sponge and absorbing all these new players, trying to fit into a similar but also different system at the same time. They want to keep some of the things that Jonathan did so well here and that we know works here in Corvallis and at Oregon State. But you also got to put your own spin on it, because Trent Bray is not Jonathan Smith. If he was Jonathan Smith, he'd probably be in East Lansing right now.
That's a rabbit hole we could really go down. Well said, TJ. Well said. I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, again, as we all heard, Jonathan had space on that plane for Trent Bray. he planned to take Trent Bray on that plane with him. So, luckily, what do you call it? Loyalty got in the way. I know Jonathan forgot about that on his way out, as did many others. But, loyalty still means something to someone. Same thing over to you, Ryan. I mean, what have you kind of noticed just the overall differences just that we've seen under Trent Bray this fall?
I would say probably the biggest thing that I noticed was more of just the fact that the chippiness in camp started early.
It's
That
true.
sort of
Good
that
point.
first week, which didn't really happen under Jonathan, at least in the two camps that I covered of his. And I mainly saw that more towards the back half, but you can also probably attribute it to the fact that there's so many spots up for grabs that guys want to compete and show, hey, I want to be a starter. But also too, I just think there's more intensity, at least more energy coming from Bray than I have
Right.
seen, and that's more of just probably his personality shining through a little bit. But yeah, like TJ said, they're really keeping a lot of the fundamental things kind of the same that worked past couple seasons, but just kind of adding on to it in their own different way and trying to trying to shape their roster a little bit and what they're looking for, because otherwise it's not going to be immediate success, especially with the talent that this team lost from last year now going into this year.
100%. And we're obviously going to dive into, what we've seen from fall camp. And we'll go ahead and start on the defensive side of the ball. I know y'all want to hear about the quarterbacks. We're going to say the best for last there. So just definitely stay tuned throughout the podcast. Let's start defensively, fellas, because I think that is where the strength of this Oregon State team is going to be, right? We'll get into kind of some of the question marks offensively to come. But just as far as where we think day one, this team is going to be able to, be at a similar level to what we've seen the last couple years. And we've kind of heard that from Trent Bray and others will be the defense. I think when you combine the fact that you've got good returning talent and add in the fact that you have not one, not two, but three former defensive coordinators overseeing that defense with a little bit of Bray, a little bit of Keith Hayward, and a little bit of Eliza Tuyaki on the defensive line. I think you have, and, I'll throw in Rod Chance back there who does the DBs, and then Bray who also handles the linebackers. I think the coaching on defense is superb. And, despite the fact that we'll get into it, we've got an entirely new front seven that Oregon State's going to be running out there. But starting in the defensive backfield, guys, there's a lot to like there as far as your anchors 1 and 2 with Jaden Robinson, Kobe Singleton. That's a duo that I think would start for quite a lot of teams. It definitely would start for every team in the Mountain West. And I'd be willing to bet, several teams from the old quote Pac-12. That's a really good 1-2 cornerback punch. You kind of have Skylar Thomas settling into one of the safety spots, and then most likely Jack Conne at the other. What do you guys like of that starting group? And then who do you see as kind of the biggest depth pieces behind him? Let's go ahead and start with you, TJ.
So I don't know if we'll see Kobe start week 1. They were really hesitant to just sort of name him as a first team defensive back this week. 'Cause it's only been about a week. He's really been on the field playing and getting those first team reps. And Rod Chance was saying after practice, he's still a half step behind most of these guys when it comes to just getting comfortable with the flow of this defense. So that could leave opportunities open for some of these other guys to play in a spot. I do think they'll eventually, by the time, say, they go play Oregon in week 3, that he will be starting. And those are two of the most experienced corners that are one of the most experienced starting corner duos in the country, which is good. I like the safeties. They almost have Skylar playing as a, quasi linebacker role. They're in that second safety spot. They're really utilizing his size. He's playing much closer to the line of scrimmage, which I think is really nice and sort of complements the nickelback. If they're going to have one on the field, they ran 5 DBs a lot during the fall. That fifth defensive back was, for the most part, I think Noble Thomas. It sounds like they want Noble Thomas to be that starting nickelback and say he's made a lot of progress in the run game. He's going to get in there. He's going to make some tackles on some running backs and some tight ends over the middle, which is really nice to see. And then the two other guys, Andre Jordan's been mixing in on the outside. He's gotten a ton of reps on the first team. So he's going to be a guy who's going to be out there playing on the field a lot. And then Jaheim Patterson is just a giant of a man. He is enormous. As Rod
You said
Chance
that a
said,
couple
I want
times now.
him to be the first guy off the bus when we're playing because that dude is just intimidating.
Yeah.
Now, he's not going to start over anybody, I don't think. But man, if we're talking about tools, he's fast. I think they said he ran a 4.5. So
yeah.
at that size, at 6'4", I mean, he's got all the tools you would want in as a cornerback. So it's an exciting group. It's a mix of experience and athleticism, and I think it's a really good chance to replace some of the talented dudes they lost last season.
Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, similar thoughts there. I do also think that Exodus Ayers could be a guy that you could see some rotation in there. He's been kind of running more exclusively with the second team defense, but he could be a guy that could be a significant contributor back there. And then another guy too that I'm kind of high on, Sai Vinderwale, the transfer from Cal. Chance said that arguably he's their best athlete in that DB room, and he's also played that nickel spot too at the times when Noble Thomas isn't on the field, or I mean even in spring too, same thing when he was out for undisclosed reasons. He's the first guy that can be up there, and then he also can play safety too, so he's a versatile piece around there that you can move around. Jaheim Patterson's also another guy that I like, just that length back there. I mean, you kind of have almost your Kitana Ladapo 2.0 a little bit there. Needs time to develop, of course, but he fits that kind of mold. And what I really like about Skylar in particular, he's kind of playing almost like a sub linebacker role, just at that safety spot. And that's like perfect for his skill set and what he's able to do in that backfield.
And I'm curious, I want to get your guys' thoughts on just a couple names. Do you think we'll see Trice Ivy in the rotation this year?
I think
he'll
so.
probably rotate in at safety, I would imagine. He was solidly second team free safety, it looked like.
Okay. I'll throw out a couple more. Mason White, Amarian York. Do we see them this year?
I would say York a little bit as well too, potentially rotating in. He got some reps with the ones a little bit, mainly ran with the twos. Mason White, I think Mason White's that, and I kind of talked about it earlier, was like, I think he's that first guy off the bench.
Sure,
a little bit plays that CB4 role or CB5, depending on however the coaching staff works through that. He's made plays. He's very talented. It's just he has two guys kind of in front of him, and Kobe and Jaden. When Kobe's fully, has his legs under him, that's kind of hard for him to, kind of crack that starting spot. But I expect him to be a rotational piece.
Gotcha.
For sure.
And last but not least, because I know it's going to be of interest, not expecting a lot out of Alton Julian this season, are we?
No, I don't think he took a single rep during the fall.
I don't think he did either. From what I can see.
He was off to the side most of fall camp.
Yeah, and if that's the case, we'll see. We'll obviously be keeping an eye on him, but I know some folks have been curious, asking about him. He, just in the practices we've all been at, which have been, all of them, we just haven't seen him really go live at all. So I think it's safe to assume he's probably not going to be in the rotation as we currently stand. If that changes, we'll obviously keep you guys apprised. Let's go ahead and move inwards. Talk about the linebackers. Replacing 4 starters. Really, you're replacing your 2 insides. You lost, obviously, Drew Chatfield and John McCartan, and then you also lost Corey Stover, who was really like another outside linebacker too. So really wiping the slate clean, but you have the benefit of Melvin Jordan and Isaiah Chisholm there in the middle. This was a position battle that didn't even turn out to be a battle, guys. Like, we thought, Guy Reese-Goodman and Aiden Sullivan would maybe push those guys, having a lot more playing experience, albeit from the JUCO level. That job belongs to those 2 guys.
Yeah, it was pretty steady. The outside backers too, I will say. Like, it seems pretty solidly that it's going to be Nico Taylor and Omotosho on the outside. And, I'll say the middle backers. I think that's going to be something we evaluate as the season goes along. I thought for example, like what they could provide. I thought like the pass defense was fine that they provided, I think, in fall. The run defense is sort of hit or miss because they can only tackle so much during fall. So that'll be a that'll be something that evaluates as the season goes along. Like it seems like a solid group. They've got a lot of athleticism. I'm curious how the communication is going to be now that they're going to have the in-helmet communication from the sideline. And it's going to be the job of, I'm pretty sure it's Isaiah Chisholm that's going to be the one calling the defense, or Keith Hayward's going to be calling the defense to Isaiah Chisholm, who's then going to tell the rest of the defense, and communicate where all that's going to go. So that'll be, again, another thing that we're going to have to evaluate, that we saw only in the second scrimmage did they do that with the in-helmet communication.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And we're going to just need to see more and how it works with these guys. But, it's a fine group. More specifically on the outside backers, I think it's a theme with the outside backers and the defensive line that I didn't really feel like overall they got enough pressure on the quarterback throughout the fall. So that's something you hope they get better at. But if we're just comparing to last season, it's less. They're not getting as much pressure. There's not as much true pass rush ability from those guys.
I'd share very similar thoughts about that. I mean, your best look at what Chisholm and Jordan would bring is the Sun Bowl.
Right.
You would just kind of have to evaluate as the season goes on and kind of base their past performance on that. But I really like those two kind of there. They definitely seem to be kind of the next guys up. Even last year too was the same thing. And then for both Goodman and Sullivan, I could see them rotating in depending on what they want to do defensively. But it really was just kind of more of like, hey, these are the two that we're going to roll with, and we'll see where everybody else kind of ends up at. Yeah. And then for the outside guys, I like what Olu brings in particular, because it seemed to be that anytime that he was making plays last year, he was in the backfield. I keep saying that, like that was something where everyone was kind of like, where's Olu? What's going on? But he had guys in front of him and was kind of buried on that depth chart too at the same time. But yeah, it was really a lot of like hit and miss, and kind of situationally too. Whatever they were running situational periods, it was also kind of hard to get a real tell on tackling from them, because if you're just, say doing a 2-minute, right, and trying to run out the clock, there's not a lot that they can do within that period anyway. And we'll just have to see how it translates over into the game, because sometimes it looks like, oh yeah, they're getting good pressure. Other times, not really. So it's just really simulating that to what you do in practice to how that translates over in an actual game.
Absolutely.
I will say Nico made the best play of all fall camp on defense. But we highlighted in the second scrimmage. It was pretty awesome. If you want to go read about it, go look at it over on the game board, our second scrimmage report.
Yeah, no, it was everything you guys said, solid. As far as the young guys, I would be surprised if Will Haverland and Shamar Michael didn't redshirt. I know Shamar's gotten into the mix a little bit in camp, and we've seen his name mentioned. I want to give a shout out to Zekiah Sias. He brings just great size. Obviously a young kid, probably not going to play, probably pretty clearly fourth in that rotation behind Nico, Olu, and DJ Westlock, but really liked him coming out of high school, coming out of Florida. So I think he's kind of just a guy to sneakily watch this year. Also, like I said, Westlock was a guy who didn't play much at Missouri, but probably the biggest offer sheet I've ever seen for an individual player. 50 some odd offers out of high school. So his potential, but like TJ said, last year, when you had a senior John McCartan and a senior Drew Chatfield and a redshirt junior, really senior Corey Stover, who had all seen hundreds of snaps between them, that was, as we mentioned, a very effective group at getting after the quarterback. And then, let's go ahead and transition to the defensive line. Maybe a big reason, TJ, why those linebackers were able to get to the quarterback is that they had a really veteran defensive line behind them, or in front of them, rather. This year, very different, right? So obviously Oregon State graduated, 4 guys off that line, and, you can throw in Sione Lolohea depending on whether he was down or up on his position. So that was, another area that had to be refreshed. And, Ryan and I touched on it today in our defensive depth chart preview, is this position group, like no other, ravaged by injuries. So you talk about, every year there's a position group where injuries happen. Nick Norris, Takari Hickle, and Kels Howard all injured. Takari Hickle, Kels Howard not going to play this season. Nick Norris, we're still waiting to see. But regardless, at least Norris and Hickle would have been in the defensive line rotation. Most likely Howard too, if he had had a full fall to practice. But nevertheless, like losing 3 bodies when you're, a school like the situation Oregon State's in, that's tough. Like it's going to be a next man up and heavier pressure on those guys there, particularly Semesi Saluni, who's going to be the senior kind of Isaac Hodgins role this season. But you're going to be breaking in 2 new starters and most likely, Jacob Schuster, maybe Thomas Collins, maybe Tyji Hill. It's maybe Josh Griffiths. Like it's going to be interesting to see how that unit comes together because, when you lose a couple players that are effective like that, it can be detrimental as the season goes.
Yeah, it can. And I still think they're going to have a decently deep group. It sounds like, even with those injuries, and it's certainly going to hurt the line, it doesn't mean they're going to go to only playing 6 guys on the line.
Sure.
It sounds like they really are going to rotate. And I think in the place of a couple of those guys who got hurt, I've really been impressed from what we've seen from Jacob Schuster, especially the last week.
Yeah.
He is, especially on the interior, which is really where the great defensive lines separate themselves, is the ability to get pressure between the 2 guards. And, that's where Jacob Schuster rushes. And I think he's done a good job getting some more pressure on the quarterback in the last week. But, a lot of these other guys, especially Josh Griffiths, we've seen him rush outside and inside, which is, pretty valuable. Even though he's not the biggest dude in the world, he's only 263. So that more leans to rushing outside opposed to inside. But he's done both. That's pretty valuable right there. And if these guys can find a way to manage enough snaps and find some more production after the front 4 guys, I think it's going to be really helpful. But certainly the injuries do not help.
Yeah, and or go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was my biggest concern with injuries was, as we get later into the season and injuries happen over the course of the season, everybody's dealing with something. But it sounds like too that they're going to rotate through those guys each game, and depending on how well they manage the snap count and everything like that, then I wouldn't expect injuries to be too much of a detriment to this group throughout the course of the season. Like TJ mentioned, Josh Griffiths, saw him kind of kick inside and rush the passer that way. He's also rushed outside too. I'd expect probably another guy along that front to potentially do that as well if called upon. Jacob Schuster was a guy that, even though it was the last day of camp on Tuesday, every time I look down at my notes and while I was watching, I just see 62 screaming into the backfield. And that is also too a testament to him because he had missed the first half of fall camp. And he's going to be a guy that they're going to lean on pretty well there as well too. And then Thomas Collins is another guy I'm high on as well. Very, very twitchy at the line of scrimmage, getting that first step ahead of the offensive line in his pass rush moves. So I think it's going to be just managing the health of that room over the course of the season and just rotating through guys to get pressure on that quarterback, which I like that philosophy personally. I've seen teams at the NFL level use that before, and it just keeps guys fresh. It keeps guys ready to go throughout a game where, fatigue sets in and that's where, you can't get pressure on the quarterback sometimes where the quarterback has that pocket and all day to throw.
Right. And I think, with the thing that this group stands out the most to me is when we were at that scrimmage that was moved inside and we got a really good view, the size. And I'm not to say that James Rawls and Isaac Hodgins and, that group wasn't big, but they weren't moving into the 300s. There might have been one guy on that line who was over 300 pounds last year. And then I look at this group now, and you guys mentioned Jacob Schuster, 6'1", 325. I mean, that's a true nose tackle. I know the Beavers don't really have like specific nose tackle DN, like it kind of varies a little bit, but I really like the size there. And, I got to give a shout out to our recruiting analyst, Dylan Callahan-Crowley, because he mentioned Jacob Schuster a year ago when he came in, and, he covers Minnesota as well as Oregon State, where Schuster came from. And he was like, hey, this kid's coming back out west, obviously a Lacey, Washington, Tumwater kid. And he's like, just keep an eye on this guy. He's got great size. And, here just a year later, he's played himself into a starting spot, most likely. So definitely think that's something to watch too. And, like just to your guys' point, like we'll see. Trent Bray wasn't ready to rule out Nick Norris for the year when we asked about him, but that was a guy who had been very productive at Northern Colorado. So I'm curious to see, if what his status is ultimately. But yeah, I mean, as far as Takari and Kels Howard go, like you said, I think it shouldn't be too detrimental, but two guys I was just really excited about, right? Like Kels Howard was one of the highest rated defensive linemen to sign with the program a couple years ago now. And he's dealt with some stuff early on. And then Takari had been someone we'd been really high on for a couple seasons, and to have that injury to close out spring was certainly tough. But to your guys' point, I think the depth has been solid. A guy who hasn't gotten a mention as well as Tyji Hill. He played a couple years at LSU. That's good experience going from the SEC to the Pac-12. Well, Pac-2, I should say. Whatever it is. But hey, it's still 12. I still see Pac-12 on the Shield logo on the field, guys. So is it the Pac-12 or is it not?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so we're just gonna roll with it and call it the Pac-12.
Yeah, but if anybody mentions Pac-2, I'm just calling it the Tupac Conference. Like just roll with it.
Yeah,
at this point.
I'm with it, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll go ahead and slide on over to the offensive side of the ball. And the offensive line, TJ mentioned it earlier in the podcast. Last really 2-3 years, it has been a consistent group where it has been just, maybe they replace one guy and you have an experienced guy to come in. This year, it's a little bit different. They obviously brought back Josh Gray, brought back Grant Stark. With the injuries that happened, Grant Stark ended up starting towards the end of the year. But nevertheless, not a full-time starter this last year, was at Nevada before he came over to Oregon State. So that's something. And then we see now why the Beavers went out and got Van Wells and Gerard Christian Lichtenham from Colorado, because, they're going to be breaking in probably one guy with little experience, whether that turns out to be Tyler Volton, Nathan Elu, Jacob Strand. Like there's a couple guys that could be vying for that last spot. We feel pretty confident in saying it's probably going to be Tyler Volton, but again, little experience. But just from your guys' perspective, how big is it to only have one guy that you're breaking in and be able to grab a Gerard Christian Lichtenham, who started 30-some games for Colorado at left tackle the last 3 years, and a Van Wells, who was one of the better centers in the country last year for Colorado? So how much does that just be able to kind of buoy your most important group when you add them with a guy like Josh Gray, who we all know is going to be a high pick and go play on Sundays?
It is pretty important. And I think the other thing too is that I think the general, I'd say, takeaway from the offensive line and how they're going to be handled is it's really not going to change all that much from how it was last year. Because, Kyle Devan, whenever you talk to him about how Jim Mahalchik handled his offensive line, I mean, it's just nothing, like, it's nothing but praise. It's like the system's really good. And as any good coach would want to, it's like, well, since this is a good unit, it's run very well. We want to keep as many aspects of that system as we can, especially if we're keeping a lot of these guys from the same system. Like, it's going to work out pretty well. For example, he's like, yeah, we're still going to run a lot of outside zone this year, just like we ran with Damian and what Jonathan's offense was. So I think that really makes it that much easier. It's not like they're making these guys learn an air raid offense.
Right.
It's going to be a lot of the same things when it comes to how they're blocked. So I think that's very, very important. And I think just all the starts along the offensive line, it can't, having Josh Gray back, I think might be the best thing to happen to this offensive line. Seriously.
Maybe to the
another
team.
Coach out there.
Yeah, I mean, he and Jaden Robinson both, I'd say, as far as the team, huge. I mean, Ryan, and obviously you can piggyback off that.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely huge. A guy that's seen it before, seen multiple snaps, can help out Tank as well too along that left side.
Yeah.
And also knows the other spots along that line pretty well. And really the fact that you only have one new guy and with guys that kind of have done it before, that have played significant snaps, that's huge. That's really, really huge. And I think this is probably one of the first camps that at least I know of where the line pretty much was set from the beginning.
Yeah,
where maybe you had some guys rotate, but pretty much except for that right guard spot, everything else was set.
Yeah,
for the most part. And Yeah. No, I'm high. I'm high on them. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a
This
good
year.
unit and not a lot for us to get into from that perspective, just because like the boys said, it's a line that's been pretty settled in. Let's go ahead and switch on over to wide receivers, and we'll go ahead and include tight ends because that's another position that I think is kind of all in the same breath. But starting over at tight end, I mean, not a lot of surprises there either. Obviously, Jermaine Terry was expected to kind of be the leader in that room. My biggest thing is who kind of slides him as that option behind him. Is it Cooper Jensen? Is it Gabe Milborn? Is it Bryce Caulfield? And that's ultimately where we kind of stand there. What are your guys' thoughts on the tight end room?
Yeah, well, I think whichever guy slots in there is going to get a good amount of a good amount of run. They're second. So we talked to Bryce, right? Bryce or Gabe?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Bryce this week, and yeah, he was lopping on a lot of praise of how much more the tight ends are going to be involved in this offense. So I think it's going to be really important for them to nail the second of those. Could I tell you which one's the best receiver of all of them? It's Terry, but he's going to start. So I like as of the rest of them, they're going to have to go out there and they're going to have to claim some spots when it comes to the tight ends. But like it's not like they're going to have a lack of options there
Sure.
for second receiving tight end. It's a group that I think they'd be comfortable playing 4 guys if they can.
Yeah, very very similar to that. I've seen Caulfield go out first after Terry. So that's at least where I think he kind of slots in, maybe in that kind of pecking order. And then that third tight end has kind of been rotated around a little bit. Gabe Milborn's gotten some run. Cooper Jensen's got some run. TJ Zimmerman, guy I've kind of liked a little bit, has gotten some run as well too. And Andy Alfieri has been usually that blocking tight end when they go to that 12, 13 personnel look, but he can catch too. So they got options. It's just somebody's got to kind of, I think, step up and kind of solidify themselves behind Terry.
Yeah. And over at wide receiver, obviously we mentioned injuries earlier. This group took a big loss with Jimmy Valson, obviously not going to be playing this year. He was obviously the returning leading wide receiver, but bring in Darius Clemens from Michigan. I think that's pretty cut and dry. He will be one of the starters along with Trent Walker. Who's that third guy who's going to start, or do you think it will extend into camp, guys? Because I like what we've
into
seen.
Week 1.
Or sorry, yes, into the season. But yes, like I think it's pretty cut and dry though. Clemens and Walker will start.
So I think the rest of the mix, I think David Wells has a very good case. He's played
like
a
him.
lot during camp and he's made some really nice catches and he's showcased some good speed too.
Okay.
But Jordan Anderson, I think, is the best route runner they have. I mean, that dude is so smooth as a freshman that I think if I'm going to circle 2 guys, it's going to be those 2
David
to look
Wells
out
and Jordan.
for in those sort of 2 to the 3 to 4 receiver sets if that's what they plan on going. Because got Clemens to go downfield. Walker's going to be probably intermediate. Like Jordan Anderson, like he can get himself open whatever part of the field he's at.
Yeah.
He's showcased some really nice things. I think the real problem is we don't really know who the real deep threat is because they didn't throw it deep at all during camp.
Right.
So I could not tell you who's going to catch a 70-yard bomb for a touchdown because I legitimately don't think they completed a single one of those passes.
Yeah, Ryan, who do you like for that third spot? And I guess kind of to piggyback off that as well.
I like David Wells for that. I kind of wanted to see a little more of that speed from that third wide receiver option. I mean, Clemens has some speed with his size, but like that kind of sort of similar to, you're not going to get the Anthony Goldsilas Bolden speed, but as close as possible to get to that. Or Zach Carr too. He hasn't practiced all of fall camp, but at least being able to throw to him, I think he's made a strong case for that. Jordan Anderson's another guy I've liked, probably played more of a role into some significant playing time than I potentially thought initially he might have gotten. Taz Reddix is another guy I like there as well too. Jeremiah Nogas I know has gotten that kind of wide receiver 3 spot as well too, but Taz Reddix I think is another guy that to look out for that spot.
I passed over Noga. I think he's going to be the third guy.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think like he probably will be, but I'm curious I like what you're saying, TJ. I wonder if any of those young bucks eventually kind of push him a little bit because I really liked what I saw from them too. And then Obviously, Malachi Durant, the freshman, had a few moments during camp as well. I don't really expect to see, more than, like I said, Jordan Anderson, as TJ mentioned, is definitely the guy as far as freshmen go because he was here in the spring. But yeah, that'll be a room we want to keep an eye on for sure. Quickly moving over to running back. This is one of those positions we really feel is another one of those cut and dry. You know what you're going to get. Jam Griffin, Anthony Hankerson, 1A, 1B. I don't really think it matters who starts. I think they're very similar players. If I had to say it, probably be Jam, but we'll see. Jake Reichel is kind of settled in as that kind of 2. And then you got the 2 young bucks, Cornell Hatcher and Saladin Allah, coming up. Do you guys think we'll see Cornell Hatcher and Saladin Halal work their way into the rotation and kind of push Jake Reichel a little bit? Because we
I
know
don't think so.
Hankerson and Jam Griffin will get their carries.
I don't think so because I think Jake Reichel has a specific role that neither of those two are going to do. I mean, Jake Reichel's just a little bigger and bulkier when it comes to short yardage stuff, and especially when it would come to pass protection as well.
Yeah,
I feel like that's the kind of role he has that I don't think this year those freshmen will eclipse him.
Ryan?
It's very similar as well,
Yeah.
too. I mean, Reichel is pretty much going to be your power back, that short yardage, goal line back.
Mm-hmm.
Can do that way better than Hatcher and Allah by far, and maybe we see a little more Saladin than we do of Hatcher this year, just because like very similar skill set to Jam and Hank, but I don't think it's going to be enough to kind of cut into sort of Reichel's carries, because he's going to be a guy I think they're going to rely on a lot for getting those sort of like 5 yards or less in those like third and shorts or fourth and shorts too. So I just don't see it.
And now we're going to move on over and finish with the quarterbacks, the moment you all have finally been waiting for, as we've been teasing you throughout the podcast. But nevertheless, here we are. So obviously, guys, a lot of different angles compared to the other position groups that we've talked to on this so far on this podcast, in the sense that, we kind of have a pretty good understanding as far as predicting the depth chart to what we think is actually going to happen. And, there might be, an adjustment here or two there, but we feel pretty confident across the other positions. Quarterback has still kind of got us a little bit puzzled, and not from, just like us not knowing who it's going to be, but more just like no one guy has stood out in that room. It's entirely possible that a guy stands out in the 2 closed practices that they have this week, and that is, what we don't see and all those things. But I just kind of want to get from each of you guys, let's run down the quarterback battle. It's obviously between Bengal Branson, Giovanni McCoy, and Jabari Johnson. We'll start with you, TJ. Just overall, like, I someone asked me today, like, about this quarterback battle, and I was mentioning, like, I've covered, 10, 11 Oregon State, camps, and, sometimes there's been a Sean Mannion that has dominated, or a DJU who has been like, okay, that's going to be the guy, and, it's like the quarterback battle doesn't really matter because that's the guy. And I've also seen quarterback battles where there's been some guys who have not been super great players. This quarterback battle has just been, I think there's some talent, but it's just been very underwhelming to me. Is that too much of a stretch, TJ?
Well, the difference between this year and last year is that when we watched DJ in the spring of 2023, he looked terrible. He was not very good. He looked like he was trying to learn a new offense. He was swimming underwater, etc. The difference between him and 17-year-old Aiden Childs was minimal.
It was
in the spring of 2023. The difference is between this year and last year, when DJ stepped onto campus in the fall and we got to watch him operate the offense, first practice, you're like, that's him. That's it. Mm-hmm. Look how much better he looks now than he did in the spring. I can't tell much difference with this quarterback room in the spring versus now, besides the fact that Jabari Johnson just gets more reps now. I've just been it's so underwhelming, like waiting for someone in a week to stop making mistakes and to not throw that ball, not throw an interception, get more on time. Like this fact that here in week 4, I mean, it's still like you can't rely on either the 2 most experienced guys, Giovanni McCoy or Ben Gulbranson, to like be consistently on time and 2, make good decisions. Like my boss here at the station at KEJO, when we're standing around on a media scrum, looking around, and he was making his case for Ben Gulbranson, and it was like, okay, so why? Like, why would you choose Ben? It's like, well, he seems like the safest option, which in theory, if you think about it, I'm like, well, I agree. You're the most comfortable with him. He's been in the system on campus the longest, et cetera, et cetera. I think Ben threw 2 picks on the next 2 plays and that. And that was only a small sample of the turnovers he's had in camp. So you sit there and you're just trying to make a rational case for all of them.
Yeah.
And it's just difficult.
It's hard.
With Ben, he's made a ton of mistakes turning the ball over. And it, especially like pushing the ball down the field, it doesn't feel like it's all there. Giovanni McCoy has been very underwhelming as a quarterback. Just looking at all the traits he brings to the field, I'm just wondering do any of these traits really stand out? And I would say no, from what I've seen. And then Jabari Johnson's got like 5 sessions with the first team, period.
Yeah.
So you can't in good faith run him out there week 1 against Idaho State with the starting offense, because he hasn't gotten the reps with all the starters yet. I think that's an unfair ask to someone who has not played in college very much.
Right.
So that's where we just get left here in this just
lurch almost.
Just land of unknown of what quarterback we thought over 4 weeks we'd be able to have it. One guy to make a step forward and make a better case that he's the starter. As Gundy said, one day someone looks great, and then the next day we're back to square one with all these guys. And now you know what I'll say? Even after watching the last practice on Tuesday, we are back at square one all over again.
Ryan?
Very, very exact same thoughts. I mean, McCoy, he was brought in, the expectation was, oh yeah, he's definitely going to be the guy to potentially win that starting job. I have not seen it through spring, through fall. I, try to give the benefit of the doubt of, hey, learning a new offense, McCoy may figure this out by fall camp. He hasn't. My biggest knock on him has been his decision making in practice, and even there, I think I wrote it in one report. Like he threw an interception basically right to Isaiah Chisholm in 7-on-7. No pass rush, no nothing. That really concerned me. The only thing was Chisholm dropped the ball, but otherwise, if that's a real in-game situation, that's going the other way for 6.
Right.
And sure, some of those times you see some of those flashes of what made him so successful at Idaho, but it's not in a consistent enough way. And then with Ben too, that first week he looked like to be the guy to run off with the job, and then now not really so much. The turnovers have been a big thing. Sure, maybe he's a little more accurate on time with the ball compared to Giovanni, but by how much? Really, he seems to be also the only quarterback that can really push the ball down the field compared to the other two. Jabari's got the arm, but he just doesn't have the experience, and I don't think he has my vote of confidence in being, hey, we're gonna make you the guy, we're gonna make you the starter right away. Maybe in time he can win that job and take it from Ben or Giovanni or whoever they name as the guy. But it's just a small sample size that we have of Jabari from practice, and even when he's gotten reps with the ones, it seems to be the offense is relatively on schedule, but it's more of him using his legs to move the ball. It's not necessarily throwing it down the field. And that's something where I'm just kind of like, nobody's really separated themselves too much in my mind. And if I were to kind of make a rough estimate of the depth chart, I'd probably go Ben first, Jabari second, then Giovanni third, if I had to split it up that way. But then again, I'm like, I don't envy Gundy or Bray to make that decision. I really don't, based on what I've seen, and I just don't see it from McCoy, and Ben may be slightly better, but by how much, it's kind of relative, to be honest.
Right. I think it's interesting because just to kind of give my thoughts, you guys have seen obviously more practices than I have, but when I've seen those guys go live, my opinion still hasn't changed. If Oregon State if this was not such an important prove it year as far as needing to win a certain amount of games to stay relevant in the realignment discussion, and you were just normal, Yeah, I'd roll with Jabari. I'd say he's going to take his lumps as a freshman, but it's going to pay off on the back end. He's going to be much better as a sophomore and really good as a junior, maybe really, really good as a senior. That being said, we've talked about it. Oregon State needs to probably win 7 or 8 games this year, without a doubt, to keep themselves afloat in the realignment discussion. I think a bad football season would be the worst thing that could happen as far as the future prospect. Maybe I'm over dramatizing it a little bit, but we've seen like football success directly matters with this realignment stuff. Nothing else matters but football success, TV dollars, and all these other things. But success is a big part of it. So I think that's key too. But if you were to ask me right now, I kind of lean with you guys. I would go with Ben Gulbranson because at the very worst, I've seen him hand the ball off and win Oregon State games. Now, that's a really bleak outlook. That is a really bleak outlook. Do I think he can make better throws in this system than Jonathan Smith's system? 100%. His arm talent, skill set, that all just tailors more to these quick throws, 5 to 10 yards down the line, because we know this. Ben Gulbranson does not have the best arm. We saw him try to go deep in 2022, and obviously there were some struggles. TJ, now, just as far as, and Ryan too, I'm curious for you guys, is it possible that any of these guys display what I like to call the gamer trait, which is they're never going to look as good as they look in game day in practice? And there are just those guys, Chance Nolan was one of them, who was a pretty mediocre practice player. I mean, TJ, you remember watching Chance Nolan practice. I don't think that's that big of a stretch. I think he was okay to maybe okay, I think would be solid, but he had a different gear on game days. And there are sometimes those players that can do that. Who's the most likely out of this trio that would have just that edge? We've talked to all of them, obviously. We've seen what they can do. Which guy would you give that effort to?
Has to be Giovanni, because Jabari hasn't played in games since high school. So it almost has to be him. We know it's not Ben. Ben looks the same in practice as he does in games.
Yeah.
Exact same. Not much has changed there. So I would think it's Giovanni. There's a reason they keep running him out there with the first team. Giovanni has gotten a ton of reps with the first team all fall camp. It did not waver. Even with his struggles, he still took his fair share of first team reps. So, when it comes down to it, here's how I'm going to think about this when it comes to a gamer. Because of that, and I'm sure the Beaver football program wants to give Giovanni a shot playing in meaningful games this year, because they did not bring him in and allocate whatever resources they needed to get him here to have him sit on the bench and not see a single snap this season. I think Ben Gulbranson's going to start. He's going to go the first series against Idaho State. After that, don't know. But Ben will be out there first. I think... my thinking of this has evolved over the week, where I'm starting to think that Giovanni McCoy will be the backup just because they trust him more, just because they know he's got more game experience, and because he's played against real opponents and he's had success. So that gives you much more confidence in him coming cold off the bench than Jabari Johnson would, who, if he's sitting third string, I mean, even if he's a backup in practice, he's going to be on the scout team. He's not going to be running the offense.
Right.
So, where are the real reps going to come from? And that's where you lean on someone like Giovanni, where I think they hope that he brings more of the gamer mentality too.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and mention Ryan Harlan had some computer difficulties, and we lost him midstream. We may or may not get him back on before we go ahead and wrap up the pod. But just ultimately, yeah, TJ. I mean, you mentioned to me you think we're going to hear a timeline on this in the next couple days. Again, we're recording this on a Wednesday, but you think we will probably hear this in the next few days?
I think I heard someone say it was going to be tomorrow or Friday. I think it would make sense Thursday, because game week starts tomorrow for them. I think they want to have this nailed down at latest by the time practice is over on Friday.
Yeah.
So that's 12:30. They want to know who's starting and who they're going to prepare to start against Idaho State on the 31st.
Right.
A whole week of that.
Yeah, and with that, like I said, I guess to give my quote unquote prediction, since, Ryan went with Ben and you went with Ben as well. I might as well just go with, go with the grain, because I just, yeah, like I said, I don't really foresee a situation like what you were saying, TJ. You put it so eloquently, like it doesn't seem fair to Jabari Johnson. Because in my opinion, really, based on what we've said, Giovanni McCoy would need to show me more. In my opinion, in my head, it really is between Ben and Jabari. It's like who offers the most upside there. And I think ultimately, you were talking about with, Kjo and John, was ultimately, I think you got to go with the safer option. And as underwhelming as that may be, like, Oregon State has the skill position players at wide receiver, at running back, to make Ben Gulbranson look good. And I think that's got to be the MO. I mean, that has to be it, right? Skill position players, get the ball, get them in space, and not try to have Ben too much under center, I think is ultimately going to be what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's going to be fascinating. I think all three of these guys are going to play this year. Seriously, I don't think the talent difference or the production difference is enough between the three of them for anyone to have the starting job for 12 games. Like,
yeah,
EJ had crappy games last year, didn't get benched. Even there were some people who called in my show and thought they should just start Kyles, which I disagreed with. But this year, if Ben Gulbranson has a game early in the season, or like if week 2, if they go down to California, he throws 4 picks,
right,
and looks like crap. I mean, why wouldn't they give Giovanni McCoy a start next week? Why not?
Right. I mean,
or Jabari Johnson. They see more than they want in camp.
Right.
And they decide, why not? We're playing Oregon. We're 3 touchdown underdog at home.
Mm-hmm.
We got to try something. We got to have the player on our roster who most resembles the talent that is on their roster back there at quarterback and playing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see how it all fleshes itself out, TJ. We'll go ahead and catch up with Ryan next time. Had some technical difficulties, and we appreciate him jumping on. Glad we got his thoughts on the quarterback competition before the computer died. But hey, TJ, that's the way of technology in today's world, right? And we were extending this podcast quite a bit, but ultimately, yeah, just keep things locked at BeaversEdge.com over the next few days. Like I said, no practice that's open, but we got lots of analysis content and preview content coming up on the podcast. So again, big shout out to Ryan Harlan, TJ Mathewson on this edition of the podcast. And obviously catch us next week. We'll be, getting ready for, game week and all that stuff. So make sure to stay locked to BeaversEdge.com, and appreciate everyone checking out this edition of the pod.